The transfer market in European football is often treated as entertainment, as spectacle, as the simple buying and selling of athletic labor. Yet beneath the surface, it is more than sport. It functions as a miniature system of international relations. Clubs act like states, negotiating alliances, calculating resources, and projecting influence through acquisitions and disposals. In this theater, the recent episode involving Nicholas Jackson, Chelsea Football Club, and Bayern Munich is not merely a collapsed loan deal. It is an instructive case study in how economic realities, institutional priorities, and long-term strategic visions converge to shape outcomes that resonate far beyond a single player's career. The facts are straightforward enough. Nicholas Jackson traveled to Germany under the belief that he would be joining Bayern Munich on a loan basis. He underwent preparations for a medical examination. Yet no contract was ever signed. No paperwork was finalized. Chelsea, having initially granted permission for the trip, abruptly revoked that permission. They ordered the player back to London, citing immediate squad needs after injuries and sales disrupted their forward line. Bayern Munich, unwilling or unable to finance a permanent deal, were left with nothing. Jackson himself, understandably disoriented, returned to his employer with his ambitions frustrated. But to understand the deeper significance of this episode, one must examine the structural context within which it occurred. Chelsea in the present era are not merely a football club, but an economic entity under constant scrutiny. Their squad-building strategy has been characterized by aggressive acquisitions, long contract structures, and heavy wage commitments. Jackson is bound by a contract that stretches to the year 2033. That is not just a sporting arrangement. It is a long-term asset lock, akin to a sovereign state securing resources for a decade in advance. The cancellation of his loan illustrates the inherent tension between short-term flexibility and long-term control. Chelsea wanted to reduce their surplus of forwards, but when Liam Delap was injured and Christopher Nkunku was transferred to AC Milan, the calculus changed overnight. Strategic priorities were redefined. The club could not afford to release another striker, even temporarily. In the logic of institutions, sentiment is irrelevant. The only imperative is to maintain operational capacity. From Bayern Munich's perspective, the episode reveals a different constraint. They sought Jackson only on a loan basis. They insisted repeatedly that they did not possess the financial latitude to pursue a permanent transfer. This insistence is not trivial. Bayern are one of Europe's most commercially powerful clubs, yet even they operate within defined fiscal boundaries. Their refusal to enter permanent negotiations signals both caution and recognition of structural shifts in European football finance. Where once German prudence was contrasted with English extravagance, now even Germany's largest club must navigate the same currents of debt, revenue, uncertainty, and wage inflation. To demand only a loan was to signal caution. To be rebuffed was to reveal the limited leverage they held in this particular negotiation. It is a reminder that even great institutions can find themselves constrained by broader economic architecture. The human element cannot be dismissed. Jackson believed he was about to become heir apparent to Harry Kane in Munich. He saw personal elevation and professional opportunity. Instead, he was recalled to London, instructed to resume his role in a squad that had just undermined his sense of status by acquiring other forwards. His disappointment is understandable. Yet here the broader lesson is that individuals, however talented, are subordinate to institutional needs. In geopolitics, leaders may aspire to personal glory, yet they are often sacrificed to larger structures. In football, the same principle applies. The contract binds the player to the club. Wages ensure compliance. Ambitions must be reconciled with realities. Jackson's disillusionment is not unique. It is emblematic of the way globalized football increasingly resembles the geopolitics of constrained sovereignty. The market itself imposes additional limits. Even if Chelsea had been willing to sell, they would have faced the challenge of identifying a replacement within 48 hours of the window's closure. The scarcity of available forwards meant that sudden liquidation of an asset was strategically reckless. Bayern Munich's refusal to engage in a permanent deal thus doomed the transaction. They wanted temporary use of a resource without assuming the long-term risk. Chelsea demanded a guarantee of value in return for weakening their own position. The two positions were irreconcilable. The logic of negotiation dictated collapse. Here again, the parallels with diplomacy are stark. Agreements fail not because participants are irrational, but because structural constraints make compromise impossible. At the same time, other transactions unfolded across the market. Liverpool pursued Mark Guehi, offering £35 million plus a sell-on clause. Crystal Palace sought £40 million. The gap was narrow, and negotiations hovered around add-ons and contingencies. The lesson is familiar. Valuation is never fixed. It is fluid, shaped by leverage, timing, and replacement availability. Palace's coach, Oliver Glasner, argued it was too late to replace his defender. Yet his influence was advisory, not decisive. The final authority rested with club executives, whose perspective was broader and more financial. Again, the individual will was subsumed beneath institutional calculus. If Liverpool escalated their offer, Palace might have yielded despite sporting reservations. That is how markets function. Principal bend before liquidity. In parallel, Chelsea themselves pursued additions, bidding €40 million for Fermín López of Barcelona. Here is another dynamic: simultaneous buying and selling, liquidation and acquisition, contraction and expansion. Clubs behave like states in an anarchic system, constantly hedging, shifting, rebalancing. A club that today appears weakened by injury may tomorrow appear strengthened by opportunistic recruitment. Chelsea's oscillation between offloading Jackson and targeting Lopez demonstrates this fluidity. They must maintain competitive advantage, not only on the pitch, but in the reputational economy of European football, where the perception of strength can influence future negotiations. A whirlwind 24 hours at Chelsea was not chaos, but a manifestation of the turbulence inherent in an open market approaching deadline closure. When viewed in this light, the case of Alexander Isak at Newcastle becomes illustrative of another principle: the discipline of certain institutions in the face of external pressure. Liverpool were linked with a bid of £150 million, but observers rightly noted that Liverpool rarely, if ever, depart from their strict valuation strategies. They operate with consistency, refusing to be drawn into inflated bidding wars. This mirrors the behavior of states that adhere to doctrines of fiscal prudence, prioritizing stability over opportunistic expansion. Newcastle, for their part, signaled a need for additional forwards before entertaining the possibility of sale. Their requirement of reinforcement before release mirrors the classic logic of alliance substitution. One does not abandon a partner before securing another. Whether Isak remains or departs, the underlying dynamic is that markets are shaped not by desire, but by capacity, by the disciplined pursuit of structured priorities. This entire sequence of events illustrates the convergence of three forces. First, the structural force of financial regulation and market scarcity. Second, the institutional force of clubs acting as rational actors bound by contracts, budgets, and timelines. Third, the individual force of players whose ambitions collide with those structures but rarely reshape them. In each case, the outcome is dictated not by sentiment, but by the intersection of constraint and calculation. This is why transfers collapse, why negotiations stall, why even the largest institutions sometimes appear impotent in the face of circumstance. It is the same logic that governs statecraft, where leaders navigate between domestic necessity, external opportunity, and structural limits imposed by the international system. Consider the time horizon. Jackson's contract lasts until the year 2033. That is nearly a decade of binding commitment. To release him on loan would have been to reduce Chelsea's return on investment while simultaneously weakening their squad depth. To sell him outright would have required a buyer willing to meet a high valuation. Bayern Munich offered neither. Thus, the decision to revoke permission was not emotional. It was inevitable. In the same way, sovereign states rarely abandon long-term strategic assets for short-term relief unless compelled by crisis. Chelsea were not in crisis. They were adjusting to sudden injuries and sales, but they retained control of their resource. Therefore, the rational choice was to withdraw from negotiations, regardless of individual disappointment. It is tempting to view these events as chaotic, as irrational swings of decision-making in the final hours of a transfer window, but in truth they reveal systemic logic. Every actor behaved predictably according to its incentives and constraints. Bayern sought a low-risk loan because they lacked the finances for permanence. Chelsea initially agreed, but reversed course when squad needs shifted. Jackson pursued opportunity, but was bound by contract. Liverpool pursued Guehi with disciplined valuation, while Palace hesitated over timing and replacements. Newcastle clung to Isak until reinforcements were secured. Chelsea targeted Lopez as a hedge. Each step was logical, cold, structured. The turbulence is superficial. The order lies beneath. To extend the analogy further, one may say that the European transfer market functions as a multipolar system. Each club is a quasi-sovereign actor, pursuing security through accumulation of resources, balancing against rivals, and constrained by financial regulations analogous to international treaties. Transfers are treaties themselves, binding agreements that redistribute power. Loans are temporary alliances, fragile and reversible. Permanent transfers are territorial acquisitions, costly and often contested. Injuries and sales are shocks, akin to crises in international politics, forcing recalibration. The window deadline is a structural constraint, similar to diplomatic summits where decisions must be reached before expiration. In this system, clubs must balance ambition against prudence, opportunity against stability. The Nicholas Jackson episode, therefore, is not trivial gossip. It is a miniature demonstration of how power operates in a competitive, regulated, and interdependent system. The individual wanted freedom of movement. The institution demanded control. The rival institution sought advantage but lacked resources. The negotiation collapsed, not by accident but by necessity. That necessity is the essence of structure. And structure, more than sentiment, defines outcomes in both football and geopolitics. As the window closes, observers will speculate on the futures of Guehi, Isak, Lopez, and others. But the broader lesson remains constant. Markets are systems of constrained choice. Clubs, like states, may aspire to autonomy, but they are bound by finances, by contracts, by timing. Individuals may aspire to glory, but they are bound by institutions. The turbulence of transfers, like the turbulence of international politics, is surface noise. Beneath lies the cold logic of structure, the rational calculus of actors navigating a world where resources are scarce, rivals are many, and every decision carries both opportunity and risk. This is why, year after year, the same patterns repeat. And this is why, to understand a single collapsed loan deal, one must analyze it not as a human story of disappointment, but as a structural story of power, constraint, and the perpetual struggle for advantage.